recording. Yep, and I'm sharing my screen. So, hello everybody and welcome here on our eighth, I believe, yes, eighth meetup of Agile with Ukraine. And today we have wonderful guest Nigel Thurlow, that you're all familiar with. I met Nigel virtually on the face-to-face, which was, I believe, in February.
It was.
Yeah, couple of weeks before. We had some very interesting conversation about Scrum and Kanban, and we are privileged and happy to have Nigel here with us today. Yep, I'm pretty sure it's gonna be awesome. Yeah, especially having this interesting topic, Agile and Scrum solving everything. I believe a lot of people didn't read the abstract of the speech, but I'm waiting actually for the fun part to begin. So a couple of words about us. We're called Agile with Ukraine. We have Artem here, who is also an organizer of Agile with Ukraine, and what our initiative is about. So I'm Ukrainian, but I live in Poland. Artem is also from Ukraine, and we were looking for.
But live in Ukraine.
Yeah, but living in Ukraine. Yeah. We have also Sergey here, who is Ukrainian, and he's been through some very, very, very nasty stuff. Yeah, so we were looking for ways to support our country, because in first days of war, we managed to raise quite some money, but war has been more than 1 month right now, and emotion is starting to dial down for people outside of Ukraine. And we wanted to, first of all, keep the awareness up in the world about what's going on in Ukraine, but also find a way how to steadily help our country. And through this initiative, we're appealing to Agile community, first of all, to remember and being aware of what is going on in Ukraine right now. And second thing is make a small donation, because those donations help our people. So that's how I started this initiative. And about Ukraine, what's going on right now. So I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures. There are 4 cities over here. On the top left, we have city Kharkiv, which has more than 1 million people, 1.4 million people over there. And what you see right now here on the picture is how Central Square looks in Kharkiv. By the way, that is the biggest square in Europe, and it's called the Square of Freedom. On right, you see how Mariupol looks like, the city where more than 500,000 people live, at least lived, because right now they can't, the city is destroyed. And this is also the central part of the city. On bottom left, we have Chernihiv, and this is the administration of the city on the picture, which was bombed by a missile. And on bottom right, we have Sumy, a city where we have a bit more than 300,000 people living over there. So Russia is claiming that they are attacking only military objects. I believe though those pictures don't represent any military object, because how dumb should we be to have military objects in the central squares, right? Yeah. And to think of the war is actually pretty close, because I live in Poland and it's less than 800 kilometers from actually the places where we have actual battlefields, where the missiles are flying. Then they bombed Lviv, which is 25 kilometers. They actually bombed a city which was near the border, 25 kilometers from Poland. And Russia has to be stopped, and Russian aggression has to be stopped at the moment. That's why we started to cooperate with a foundation, which is Ukrainian foundation, but it is set up in Poland, in Warsaw, because currently in Warsaw, we have the biggest logistics center from where the help arrives to Ukraine. And we're cooperating with the foundation, which is called Uniters, which is formerly called the Foundation of Heroes of Maidan. For those who don't know, in the year 2013, 2014, we had a revolution in Ukraine, and we had it on Maidan. It's a large square in Kyiv where a lot of people came up to protest, and the protest lasted long. And after the protest, Russia started its aggression by annexing the Crimea and also starting the war in Donbass. It happened 8 years ago, and 8 years ago, this foundation actually began helping Ukrainian people and Ukrainian army. So I know people from over there personally, and for those people who have me on Facebook, I wrote how much the foundation done for the last month, and since the beginning of war, and by today, I made the post on 27th of March, they sent more than 3,000 tons of help to Ukraine. Just think of that number. It's a lot. It's a lot. More than 140 buses came with help to Ukraine, and more than 125 trucks, TIRs actually came to Ukraine with help. And we are raising money for 3 directions. First one is humanitarian medical help. As for humanitarian help, it's pretty obvious what it is, but medical help, it's not. It's a bit tricky because part of medical help goes to hospitals and bomb shelters, and part of medical help goes straight to the battlefield, where we have doctors who are helping our soldiers in the battlefield. Second direction is Kevlars and helmets, and you might ask us why we're raising money for that. Because currently Ukrainian army consists of 2 main parts. First part is military forces of Ukraine or Ukrainian army, where we have trained professionals, they are under contract, and let's say that they are more or less equipped. But the other part is called the territory defense of Ukraine, which consists of veterans who fought in Donbass, but also pure volunteers, people like us, but we are sitting here. And there are people who are fighting for our country and for freedom of the whole Europe. And currently we have more than 100,000 men and women in reserve, which means that they are waiting for being called. But right now they're not in the action because they just don't have the gear. But believe me, they have a strong will to support the country and to fight for it. And we have to equip them with life-saving equipment for them. And third direction is actual tactical equipment, stuff like thermal vision, night vision, gloves, boots, even drones. We are buying drones and shipping them from here to Ukraine. So every day there are multiple of buses or trucks leaving for Ukraine. So we understand that you might not feel comfortable with donating for tactical equipment or Kevlar or vest. That's why by donating, you have the ability to write a message or choose the direction toward which you are donating, and your help will be very much appreciated. So there are a couple of ways how we can make donation. First one is easy via PayPal. Yeah, Artem and I, we're going to be spamming in the chat a bit. And second one is via the Polish website, Zrzutka, where is also visible how much money has been raised. So thanks a lot for your attention. And now maybe let's go to far better part of the evening by Nigel speaking and not me. Okay.
Sorry, I was just on the PayPal site. So I was just doing the thing while you were talking with the link. So I promised that I would at least donate based on how many people were on the call. So I made some of the donations with other support groups that are helping people locally. Funny enough, another one locally in Poland. So I think all help is necessary. And as I was mentioning a short while ago, I'm just back from Budapest. I've just spent 15 days there, and that's as close as you can get, like Poland, extremely close. And in fact, the place I was staying, there were people who'd escaped from the Ukraine were actually coming into the buildings. Now, they had money, they were okay to look after themselves, and they probably had escaped from areas that were not so severely impacted like Mariupol, but it was still extremely sobering to talk to these people and to listen to their stories and to bear witness to that. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm glad I can do something. I'm glad it may bring a few people. If it drives a few donations, then that's valuable, and it's a minor thing that we can do to help. But I have absolutely no comprehension of what any of the people in Ukraine must be going through, let alone the people like yourselves who are family, friends, and I know some of the other people in the PST community who've been involved in this. Of course, one of them directly has family there that they're trying to get out of the country. So let's try and have a bit of fun, take our minds off it for a short while. and see if I can cause some trouble, and maybe that will have a bit of fun for people. Let me see if I can share my screen now. I'm on a single screen here, which is highly unusual for me because I'm in a hotel room in London. So I'm going to try and see whether this works or if I break things. So welcome to Nigel not being as professional as he normally is. Can you see the slide? Good. That's good. So everybody, I mean, most of the people who are on this call now know me, or I know them, or I've been good friends with them, or in some way engaged with them over the years. The good news is that the book we wrote on the flow system, which seemed to have confused people and excited people, and lots of people have really started to find value in it. There's a new book coming out in probably the next 3 months, which is the playbook, which will help you actually apply a lot of the things we talked about in the flow system. I may not talk about a lot of that this evening, but it will help you. Let me just move these cameras off the screen for you, because everybody's going to be seeing themselves. There we go. But basically, so the playbook will come out later this year, hopefully in about 3 months' time, and that will give you some of the hints and tips about how to actually apply the ideas that we placed in the flow system book. So hopefully that will help. There is a paper out that we wrote with Dave Snowden. If you really want to stay awake at night, you really don't actually want to get any real rest and confuse yourself even more, go to this web address, substratetheory.com. We set that up just as a quick redirect to where the paper is hosted on the journal that published it, Systems Journal. And that paper will give you some really, really cool new ideas that Professor John Turner from UNT in Texas, Dave Snowden, no introduction necessary, Mr. Knevin, and myself put together. It's about 35,000 words. So it'll take a little bit of digesting, but there's some really good new ideas in there, which I think people in the thinking world that we associate with, I think they'll find that quite beneficial and quite helpful. I want to ask a question. I'm going to use Mentimeter a little bit here now. Again, because of the way I'm doing this single screen sharing, I'm going to have to stop sharing that and then jump into share my Mentimeter screen. Okay, there's a question for you. Hopefully you can all see. Oh, break that thing. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. If we can go to Menti and we can enter the code 4887-6002 and see, well, let's see if we can get a few people to answer this. So what does Scrum solve? I sort of, the title of this, as we'll mention earlier on, I used the title to sort of say, well, Scrum and Agile solve everything, don't they? And it was more of a rhetorical question as opposed to a statement. So if you can go to Menti on your phones, iPads, in a separate browser window, whatever works, and enter the code on the screen. And I've got a simple question there. What are these things, what things that are on the screen does Scrum solve? Planning, estimation or estimating, teamwork, batching, constraints, focus. Got one response so far. Let's get a few responses and see how we do. What do we think Scrum solves? And here's a tip as well. When you're doing any form of poll, especially if you use anything like dot voting, never show the results while people are voting. Because if you show the results, you can bias the outcome, you anchor people, especially if they're people who have influences in the room, like senior leaders or managers or other people that that you may be worried about if they know what you're voting. So you have to do these things anonymously. All right, let's have a quick look at the results here. We've only got a few. Oh,
that's the reason why I'm not asking question.
Okay. So let's have a look. So you're allowed to vote multiple times. And this is really interesting, the data here. So it doesn't solve any of these things except the first one, which is planning, because it's a planning system. And I stuck focusing as a little extra because I thought it was quite fun. And I think that it does help, it does help you to focus. I'll talk a bit about why it doesn't solve these other things in a minute. on the teamwork one, Scrum tells you to be a team. It doesn't tell you how to be a team. So it pushes some people together, potentially artificially, and says, hey, you need to be a team, but it gives you nothing about why you need to be a team. I like this. As Susanna says, I love how we as a group feel about estimating. Yeah, I'm with you on that one. So now if I can get rid of this chat box, there we go. All right, I'll come back to this in a short while. Let's switch back to the presentation. If I can just share my presentation again. There we go. Let's have a look at this. All right, so let's go through this a little bit now. Move this bar out of the way. Can you guys see this bar, by the way, or is it only visible to me?
No bubbles.
Good.
You can see Scrum is playing cadence and empty.
Good,
slide.
good. That's perfect. Apologies for the technical gremlins on my side. Okay, so look, we all know Scrum works a bit like this. We've got a backlog. And let's go back one. So we create a backlog. This is planning. This is work we plan to do. And I don't mind if you call them requirements or PBIs or user stories or bananas for all I care. But you're gonna backlog the things you're gonna do. And then we spend some time understanding that a little bit. And the Scrum Guide used to suggest possibly up to about 10% of our time. But essentially, we spend some time refining that. So we're planning. And whether you use a definition of ready or not, some of the trainers hate that idea. I sort of used to work with Jeff Sutherland and he liked that idea, and I've often found it quite valuable, at least for people to understand the concept of ready. So again, we're planning. And then we have our items that we think are ready to work on. So we have our refined list, and then guess what? We go and plan. We set a goal, we plan. Then we create a sprint backlog, which is a visualization of our plan. And then we execute the work. And every day we'll do our daily scrum. And whether you call it a stand-up, a huddle, or a dance, again, I really don't care. But every day you'll examine the plan, you'll inspect the plan and adapt the plan based upon the progress you're making and how everybody feels. And of course, we've got a definition of done, which tells us how we're doing and whether or not we're meeting our expectations. And then we go to our sprint review, where we work with our customer or whoever cares about the work we're doing, typically the customer, and we will get feedback, which will update our plan. And then we'll go to our retrospective, which will enable us to plan improvements in the way we work. And this phrase, Scrum is a planning cadence, actually comes from Ken Schwaber. That was a quote from Ken Schwaber some many moons ago when I was talking to him a long time ago. The other thing that Scrum talks about is complex work. And that I've had some debates in the PST community, and those that are PSTs will have seen some of those in the PST Slack community. And I make this statement that Agile and Scrum state they solve complex problems. There was some argument with me about whether it actually states it or suggests it helps solve complex problems. But the Scrum Guide, if I remember rightly, mentions complex problems 10 times in the guide. And if you do most research and have a bit of a look online, you'll find that it talks about Scrum solving complex problems. The challenge is here with the word complex, because difficult does not equal complex. A difficult problem is often ordered, predictable, it's known, or at least if we're not sure of what it is, we know we're not sure of it. Where something that's complex, I mean, I'm just using a tornado, there's a novel event, it's unordered, it's unpredictable, it's unknown, and it can't be solved by normal means. So complex means unknown and unpredictable. Most teams that I've seen work on something, I call this determinative. We can determine what the outcome is going to be. We can pretty much predict what the outcome is going to be, and we have cumulative iterations. The outcomes are planned. If you can plan the outcome, the work isn't complex. There may be some unknown aspects, but the work itself is not complex. So let's go on a little bit further and talk a little bit about this Agile thing. I'll come back to some of those other points, and we've got the conversation around those Menti results. I'll come back to those, I do promise you. So let's just dig into this Agile thing a little bit. And here's a spoiler for some of the things I'm going to be talking about in the Netherlands in a week after this recording. So this is the 15th State of Agile report. Now, I do put the precursor on there that this is sponsored by a major software vendor who sells the tools, version 1 as it is in this case, and this is now the company known as Digital.ai. And I looked at the results. These are the top things that they talk about, the problems with Agile. None of those seem to mention Scrum, of course, but none of those seem to mention many of the things that we're familiar with. They're all, with a couple of exceptions, human factors. So people aren't consistent in the way they're practicing across teams. They've got issues with what they could consider the organizational culture, and a bunch of other things on there you can read just as well as I do. So my question is, can we see a pattern here? Do we need more tools? Do we need more tools to help Scrum? Do we need, I don't know, we've got also, we'll go into the tools thing in a few minutes and have a look at what I think about some of those tools. And then I started to look at the tools thing a little bit closer in this survey from the State of Agile report. So the next thing is, where are the behaviors? Apparently, all we need are more tools. So I start to look down this list, and you can see there's some of the standard events within Scrum: daily stand-up retrospectives, sprint planning, sprint reviews. And then we start to look down here, oh, Kanban, planning poker, dedicated product owners, and so on. On the right-hand side, we start to look, they want Kanban boards, task boards, spreadsheets, some sort of project management tool, bug trackers, wikis, and so on and so forth. So it seems to me that the only thing that's going to make us better is more and more tools. So if I give people new screwdrivers and hammers and pliers and lots of these other things and more ways to use Post-it notes, apparently we're going to get a lot better. And so I then started to look at a metric. Now, this slide, I can't give you the exact reason. I'm sure actually might remember this, but this slide I created for a reason. There was a company I used to work for that decided that they could measure how agile they were by counting how many tools were being used in the organization. And so I made this slide that basically says, you know, if we count the number of Kanban boards, the number of Scrum boards, and the number of people using Post-it notes, we can calculate the amount of agility within the organization. So coming back to this, using tools certainly does not make you agile. And this is the type of metric the industry should avoid. And then I started to look a bit closer at some of the organizations I'm working with. And I thought to myself, are we just relabeling the status quo? Are we turning, you know, project managers into product owners and whatever we want to call them, or into Scrum masters, and program managers? We've got this wonderful thing called a release train engineer, which is some sort of super program manager role. And line managers are becoming tribe leads. McKinsey are pushing out the Spotify model, so tribe leads are becoming a thing. And our delivery managers becoming Scrum masters, because a lot of organizations I look at nowadays, their Scrum masters are actually making the teams work harder, faster, and deliver results every sprint. And I guarantee that it's going to, I guarantee some of you sitting there going, he's right, you know. And so I started to think, okay, what is Scrum solving here then? So we've all gone out and learned this fantastic thing that Jeff and Ken put together. And it's a great teamwork pattern. It's a great pattern for planning and for thinking about how we do work. And Scrum's a small batch process, by the way. That's why I put in this, one of the questions, it said, does Scrum solve batching? Well, no, it doesn't, because a sprint is a batch. It's a batch of work. And so I started to look at this and I thought, okay, so we're just relabeling the status quo. Right, another Menti question. Let me get back to my new share and see if I can make this thing work brilliantly. There we go. I've learned how to use this properly now. So describe Agile. You got the opportunity to type something in here. Describe what Agile is, as we're letting more people in. So how would you describe Agile? Somebody came up to you. Now, some of us are professionals. Hey, some of us are PhDs. And so I'm looking at some faces on this screen here. So describe Agile. This is a question I use with a lot of my corporate clients. I get in, there's 50, actually another few weeks ago, there's about 300 people on a Teams meeting, and I asked them to describe Agile, and it was amusing. So I mean, I'm interested to see how Andre says what he writes here. Get the PST answer here, so it should be a bit of fun.
I could always write "it depends," as a consultant.
That would be terrible. We've got hardly any responses. When I ask these questions where you have to write something, it's really slow. Many people have to type, of course, but when you ask them simple yes, no questions, binary questions, it's really easy. You get hundreds of responses really, really fast. And actually, while I was in Hungary in the last few days before we recorded this, I worked with a group of about 60 people at a client, and I asked some questions. It was really, the responses are really, really slow, especially when I asked them a question where they had to think about things. But when I asked them a question where it was like a yes, no, maybe thing, it's like really, really rapid, because it was easy for them to answer. And I can see some people typing, so I'll give them a few moments to type a couple of answers. And again, I hide the answers because I don't want people to see what other people are typing and then bias their responses. It's a really important point when you're using this type of voting system. There's hardly any answers. Let's have a look at the people who are brave enough to write something. Okay, this mindset thing. I'm going to address that in a minute. So Agile is not a mindset. It's wrong say it's a mindset. I'll tell you why in a minute. A description that very few people align with.
Put a smiley face over there. I missed that.
Adaptability. I'm okay with adaptability. I think that's a good one. What else we got? A means to managing adaptability and adjustment faster. Okay. Mindset described in 4 values. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've got a different word than mindset. I'll use in a moment for you. Easy adapts to change, MVP testing before big development. Okay, I'm okay with that. Reducing waste, establishing flow of business value. Somebody liked flow, you see. Maybe I typed that. No, I didn't. All right, so we got some ideas here. A wide set of practices and tools to help you stop pretending you can predict the future. We got some cool people on this call. All right, let me switch back to my slides. Hold on, what did I do? I broke my slides. Give me a second. Switch back to the slide deck, because there we go. And I have to do this. Okay, rid of that. Go back there. All right, Nigel's having to learn all these new ways of doing things. There we go. All right, I'll just go back to the desktop. It'll be easier. Give me a second, caller. There we go. There we go. Let's do that. Okay. Oh, there's more faces now. There we go. So this is how I describe Agile. It's a philosophy. So when you talk about values and principles, it's a philosophy. It's a people call it a mindset, but here's the problem with the word mindset. I think I've got a slide here for this. So I used this slide. Actually, I was in Poland in October last year, and I spoke with the Lean Institute there at the time, and one of my German colleagues, she taught me this word, this Weltanschauung. Now, I apologize to anybody who speaks German for my terribly bad pronunciation, but Weltanschauung, literally meaning this perception of a world, but it's your worldview. So a mindset is your view of the world. It's how you view the world with your inputs, the different triggers, the different events, the different experiences, plus also your life, your culture, your experiences growing up and education, and your worldly experiences through life and work. And of course, that's very relevant now. But this is how you see the world around us. And we have different mindsets. And actually, because of the crisis in the Ukraine, people have different viewpoints on that. And that's their mindset. So just like in the Agile world, we may form a mindset based upon our beliefs and our alignment to those values and principles, but it's our mindset. And therefore, all we can do is, I think I have another slide here. We want to try and avoid this thing called groupthink. Groupthink is a pattern, I mean, there's some words on the screen, but it's a pattern characterized by this sort of stress-induced, forced manufacture of consent. So if you're in a situation where you've got a a boss who's quite fierce or formal or very pressuring. And you've probably all been in meetings like this where they say, do you agree? Does everybody agree? And look, it says in conformity to group values and ethics. And there's a link there that people can follow, and I'll make these slides available for a link to put on the YouTube video after the recording. But essentially, if you force people to conform to a set of values, principles, ethics, ideals, then you basically are creating what's called groupthink. It's not really a belief in those values and principles. It's a forced belief, self-deception. And that's the problem with people using this phrase agile mindset all the time. So what we actually want is a shared mental model. This is from the flow system, but this is what we're looking for, a shared mental model. And it's described, and this just paraphrased here, there's more information in the flow guide, as the development of a collective understanding of, or a perception of, or a knowledge about a situational process shared among team members. And this is developed gradually as you bring people together. And I'll talk a little bit more about teamwork before we finish this evening, or the evening my time. But what we're looking for is to get an alignment around, so you take those values and principles and people believe they're good, then we can get an alignment around that, and we can start to work on how we can function and partner together, and we'll talk about teamwork, as I say, in a few moments. And then we can develop a shared mental model around that. That's a much nicer way than forcing people to adopt a mindset that somebody else has. The other myth about Agile, in my view, is it makes you faster. It doesn't make you faster at all. Or maybe the word should be Agile makes you work faster. So there's this myth that it makes you work faster. And the way I describe Agile to senior executives, and I believe I'm right, is it's the ability for the organization to make decisions faster and implement them faster. So how do you respond to world events? How do you respond to corporate events, to commercial events, to changes in markets, changes in customer demand? If it takes you 6 months, a year, 2 years to respond to the way the market is changing, that's not very agile. It's not very responsive. If you're in the mobile phone business and you don't bring a new handset out every 8 or 10 months, you're no longer in the mobile phone business. And so I ask executives, how long does it take you to respond to the market? How long does it take you then to implement the response? And that for me is how I describe Agile to senior executives. So I try and get away from this idea that it just makes people work faster. Now, hopefully, because we make the right decisions and we can implement them more quickly, we get greater speed from the perception of the customer. Remember, that's a perceptual thing. Oh, I've got another question on agility. Now I'm going to have all the fun with switching screens. This was a great idea when I planned it, but not such a great idea in execution. So now you've described Agile. The other question I ask my customers is, describe agility. Describe agility. So you just described Agile, but how would you describe agility? See how we do on this one. Again, I'm looking at my PST colleague as he concentrates hard and thinks, what am I going to put? Because you can guarantee some of our PST colleagues will look at this and go, what was Nigel talking about? Okay, I'm waiting for the brave responses here. And some people know me, so this should be easy for some people. How would you describe agility? We're getting a few answers. I'm waiting for a few people to type. All right, let's see how we're doing. I got a few responses and see how we're doing. Flexibility, ability to adapt fast, being adaptive, effective, fast. It's all these speed things again. Change plans without panic. I do like that. Don't panic, carry on. So the ability to change direction quickly at low cost, characteristics of a system that indicates something. Is the ability to deliver value faster with less bureaucracy. Adaptiveness, time and cost needed to act. Nobody writes the word Scrum in here or Agile Manifesto things, which is really good. So let me show you how I describe this. Let me make my machine work again in the right way, and I'll show you what I know I'm terrible. You think I'd be better at this, wouldn't you, really? So agility is an emergent property of the way we work and the way we behave. This is how I describe it. Now, there's nothing wrong with some of the responses that some of you gave, obviously, but the agility emerges. You can't just go and do come by R every morning at 9 a.m. or 9:15 with your Scrum team or your tribe or your squad or whatever you want to call them, and then follow the Agile and, recite the Agile Manifesto values. Most people know the values. Very few people remember the principles anyway. And even if you do Scrum, doesn't mean you're Agile. Actually, doing Scrum doesn't make you Agile. And that's one of the PSTs will throw things at me. Onshu's agreeing with me, so at least somebody agrees with me. But doing Scrum doesn't make you Agile. Oh, you say I've got PSTs agreeing. This is good. And so agility really is something that emerges based upon how we interact, how we work together, how we collaborate together, cooperate, and various other things. So then I started looking at frameworks, and I am going to present this next week to this large audience in the Netherlands. So this is the description of a framework. Genuinely, this is a description of a framework. It took me forever to draw that picture. A basic structure onto which other things can be built, not a complete and comprehensive collection of tools and methods. By definition, and dictionary definitions, a minimal set of elements to enable you to grow and evolve, not a fixed constraint. Let's look at something that's not a framework. So this is not a framework. This is definitely not a framework. And this description of it is actually directly from Scaled Agile's website. And let's look at their small version. I'm looking at the chat box. So no, this is not a framework either. So this is the minimal set of pieces to be actually able to use SAFe, according to Scaled Agile's own website. And I'm not necessarily picking on Scaled Agile, I'm using it just as an example here. But this is definitely not a framework. This is not a basic structure on which other things can be built. This is a comprehensive methodology, which is a collection of many tools and practices that have been squidged together that are used in a very defined way. Scrum is right on the borderlines of being a framework. I have an issue with one word in the Scrum guide that some people are aware of, which is that word immutable. Because if it's meant to be agile and flexible, how can it be unchangeable, which is what the immutable word means. So I want to ask you a question I asked a client of mine this week, is what is the real problem we're trying to solve? So I'll give you a few slides and I'll ask you a question in Menti. If we read the Theory of Constraints by Eli Goldratt, the goal where it was introduced, he says a constraint is anything that prevents the system from achieving a better performance measure towards its goal. That's the definition of constraint in the Theory of Constraints. So if we look at one type of constraint, that's a bottleneck. Now, a bottleneck is a constraint, but not all constraints are bottlenecks. And that sometimes catches people out. Just because we say we've got a constraint, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bottleneck. And an example I can give you of that, a legal constraint is not a bottleneck. It's an inhibiting constraint, a rule that we cannot miss or disobey. We have to obey. So regulatory or legal constraints are a type of constraint, but they're not a bottleneck. They just prevent us from doing something, inhibit the way we work because they are a constraint. But a bottleneck is typically something like a resource constraint. And this is typically what we see in a lot of organizations that some of us work in. And even those organizations that claim to be super duper agile, we actually see them working in this type of way where things are being handed off from one department to the other. And I'm not talking necessarily about design, development, testing, release, whatever the words you would use in software development or systems development. I'm talking about in an organization, because being really super duper agile in a software development team is useless if the rest of the organization looks a little bit like this. And so I created this slide the other week because I was working with a client, and everybody's focused on this digitalization, digital transformation, which is basically just upgrading all your legacy stuff and turning your less useful products into products that might be more usable by your customers. But most of that focuses on the things on the left, the DevOps thing, that little sort of infinity symbol we get in the DevOps world to show that we get requirements, and lots of magical voodoo happens in some electronic systems and fantastic value pops out the other end. But if your company looks like the thing on the right-hand side, then you're not actually very super duper agile anymore. You're actually incredibly constrained by your organization. So we've got a wonderful Scrum team here. This wonderful Scrum team here. They've just done the sprint review. They delivered some value. And then 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 weeks, however long it is, they go through all these different processes. Now, these are just random examples, not meant to represent a specific flow. And then we can do sprint 2. So as I use the case, if you're a software person, you'll get the joke. Is your digital pipeline really just a set of wait states? So now I've shown you that. I want you to tell me what you think the real problem is. And then I'll show you something else. Let's go here. Do another bit of a Menti poll here. And let's move that along. What's the real problem we're trying to solve? Because people are using Scrum and other agile techniques, maybe some XP, maybe some, other sort of less popular techniques. But what's the real problem we're actually trying to solve here? So we've got all these companies running out and turning the agile world and Scrum into a commodity now. You've got all your different major consulting houses now delivering. And we've got McKinsey using the Spotify model, Accenture's pushing a super duper version of SAFe, and Deloitte and others are doing their own. So what's the actual real problem we're trying to solve? If we go teach everybody Scrum, if we go all over the world and teach them Scrum, will we solve all the problems? I'll tell you one thing, please never use Scrum in the operating room. People will pass away rapidly. We do not want experimentation in the operating room. There's no such thing as a safe to fail experiment when you're under anesthetic. So not in my opinion anyway. So what's the real problem? What are we actually trying to solve here when we rush in with our agile banners and our agile mindset speak and our 4 values and 12 principles and our 5 key events and some other things? And they're still roles, by the way. I disagree with the fact that they're not roles. Now they become accountabilities. I'm really confused how an object can have an accountability. But let's have a look at the results. Oh, and press the right button. Increasing flow, enabling flow. You're just being kind to me, aren't you? I know you are, using the words like flow. Prioritization, everything is priority. Hell yes. I just finished work with a client where they got about 70 number 1 priorities. Poor collaboration, increasing revenue. Of course, that's what we need. Money, growth, to hell with the customer. Human behaviors, like this one a lot. The Scrum having the done increment every sprint. But how does that solve the problems I've just illustrated? So for Scrum, Scrum's only purpose is to have a done increment. That's a problem. So we know that we can talk about a lot of things about what the trainers would say that Scrum needs to have, but if the only thing we're going to have is a done increment, it's still not going to solve those other problems. In fact, what Scrum does is highlight the other problems. That's the key thing. It's then, what are we going to do? To operate on twice the patience in half the time. I'm not even going to comment on that. All right, let me just jump back to the slides. I'm sorry I'm having to do this. It's just the way I set my screen up before I joined you all. So let me just go back and do this and move everything out of the way and click the right buttons. Here we go. So I built this slide to share again with a client, different clients, but teams or multi-team systems. So if you're working in a scaled environment, whatever you want to call it, whether you call it a tribe or something else, so teams or multi-team systems focus on a single product or related products, and they should be empowered to manage their own budgets and make decisions on how they achieve outcomes, including managing their own governance. Governance meaning things like legal, compliance, regulatory, cyber risk, whatever, security, infosec, whatever word you want to put on that. How do we get that? Does Scrum give us this? Because the problem is Scrum reveals we don't have this, but Scrum doesn't provide for this. All Scrum does is provide us with this fantastic planning approach and some other benefits around Scrum. Don't mean to demean Scrum in any way. So I created this slide as well. So does your governance process look like the left-hand picture or the right-hand picture? Because this means insourcing the end-to-end governance into the multi-team system, or automating everything that slows them down. So DevSecOps, or whatever you want to call that, is actually company-wide, enterprise-wide, because actually automating the concept to cache, the soup to nuts, the requirements to delivery, whatever word you want to use, isn't about making the software guys being able to deliver things really quickly with some automated testing and a few automated release to production techniques. It's actually solving the end-to-end problems in the organization. How do I automate my governance, my compliance, my architecture review, my blah, blah, blah review, and all these other things? And I've got news for you. There's tools out there that do it. So we're moving from the compliance officer is moving from these manual processes, these very reactive things. And we're transitioning, as I said, from a definition of compliance to a definition of done. And there are tools that are out there, even put a QR code on the screen so people can actually scan it, go read. Now, I'm not selling this tool. I have nothing to do with this company. I'm just familiar with it. And this tool will fully automate InfoSec, GDPR, CCPA if you're in California. Feel sorry for you. Sarbanes-Oxley, so SOX compliance, and a whole bunch of other things as well. Architecture reviews, lots of other things. Use natural language programming or natural language, so very, very simple scripting language. And these tools become the automation, just like we automate testing and integration and deployment. We can actually automate the whole end-to-end life cycle of the work we do. These are the conversations I'm now having with companies. How do we prevent legal, compliance, regulatory, finance, vendor management, procurement, architecture review boards, all that other stuff, all these committees? How do I get rid of all of those? I don't get rid of the work they do. How do I get rid of the manual processes that hinder us and constrain us? Because the constraints in the organizations are these things. They are not the technical folks doing Scrum, because they're really, really clever and can figure that stuff out really, really fast. But it's all this other stuff within the organization that heavily constrains us. Let's talk about organizational design a bit. I guarantee everybody's seen this picture in one version or another. This was a version that the lady who does my graphics created for me, bless her. She really did draw all those individual lines because I wanted a clean version of it. And the formula's over here on the left if you want to use this. This is basically the communication pathways in a team. So if you look at how many people are in a team, you can calculate how many different ways there are to have a conversation. So if you're in a meeting with 14 people, there's 91 ways to have a conversation. And I don't know about you guys, but I've been on Teams meetings with 70 or 80 people on them. And this is what's happening now in this hybrid world. Everybody turns up on the Teams meeting because they've got to be, but the cameras are off. So effectively, they're putting a bag over their head. They're turning up like this. And the thing is this, just don't turn up. You're providing no value or input. And all you're doing is complicating the communication. I often say to people, the fastest way to solve a lot of challenges in teams and in communication in an organization is delete the informed column on the RACI matrix. So this is a real case study. I don't know if you onshore may remember this, but this is a real case study. A bunch of teams at a company I used to work for. And TFS means the flow system. it might mean something else, but it means the flow system. So there's a bunch of people, bunch of teams, and these are sort of, you know, not untypical of teams. And this was back in 2019. And so we worked out the communication pathways between the teams. And you'll see on some of these arrows, the arrows are bidirectional, and some of them are single direction, unidirectional. So this team needs to speak to this team, but they don't need to speak to the way, and these teams have to speak to each other continuously. If you apply that same formula, and this is just teams, not people in teams. If you add up the people in the teams, the number's huge, it's massive. But if you just look at the number of teams, there's 276 ways that these teams could communicate with each other, just using that same formula. If we now add that magical team called InfoSec in there, you've now got 465 ways for these teams to communicate with each other. This is why you're not agile. This is why you're struggling. It's nothing to do with Scrum or SAFe, or, in fact, I keep thinking about writing this article in defense of SAFe, because SAFe's actually given them a way to manage this mess. But the problem is they don't fix the mess. That's why it doesn't work. But this is the challenge in organizations today, that the organizational design is wrong, the operating model is wrong, and you're actually in a condition where you can't be agile because of this. Nothing to do with Scrum. And you get this, and in those organizations, there's an effect called the Ringelmann Effect, and effectively you get this thing called social loafing, where you get people in these teams. There's so many people engaged that you get people like this oarsman here pretending to row and no effort actually being produced. This is called the Ringelmann Effect, or social loafing. So this is what I say when I try to design teams, and I try to help people. And this slide's an old slide. This came out of the Scrum the Toyota Way deck. So essentially, start here. Understand your customers. Who are your customers? Identify them. Now define the products and services that you provide to those customers. Now you can identify a product owner, because the product owner understands those products and services and those customers. The product owner doesn't mean a junior person. A product owner means somebody who really has an end-to-end understanding of these products and services and these customers. And I have vice presidents who play the role of product owners in some companies. Now you can create a product backlog, because you've got a product owner can work with people who understand the customers and the products and services to build a backlog of things we might want to do to improve or enhance or update those products. Now we can identify the skills needed to build those items that we're identifying in the product backlog. We can identify people with those skills, and if we're really cool, we can get them to self-organize into a group of teams to actually be able to deliver that value to the customers. This is a value stream, by the way, in lean terms, but essentially we're now building an organizational set of a structure which allows us to deliver this value. But we still have all those other problems I mentioned. My last question, I think it is for the evening on this. I'm going to go back to my mentee, and I'm going to ask you to describe to me what teamwork is, because Scrum's all about teamwork, apparently. So let's figure out where the gaps are with Scrum and teamwork. So Scrum says we need to be a team. It's a teamwork pattern. It's a pattern or a technique that is supposed to leverage a team. We've got some clear roles or accountabilities in Scrum Mastery and in product ownership, and we've got these people who develop the value, the development team, who are responsible for creating this awesome value, but everything is described as a Scrum team, so the word team is there. So how do you describe teamwork? Okay. We're getting in the chat while we're going. I'm just reading, while you're answering this Menti poll, the benefit of the people who can't see the chat, because who will watch this afterwards. There's a comment about increasing velocity. I mean, it's a problem which consultancy firms are solving, apparently. So And maybe is velocity a synonym for revenue in some of these companies? We should behave, really. All right, I can see people typing. I'll give you another few seconds. All right, where are we? Let's have a look at these results just for a bit of education. People working together towards a common goal. That is definitely one of the definitions, the descriptions of a team. Special troops that attack the same target. I know why you put that. I'm 100% behind you. I will not dispute that at all. So, and I understand people who need and use each other to accomplish a goal. Yep, I get the inference there. Intrinsically motivated support. Love that. Fostering collaboration and communication. These are the perfect words here. Supportive environment to create something, the combined action of a group, especially when effective and efficient. So these are really, really, really good definitions. I'm actually very, very pleased with some of those comments that have come out. So hopefully some people have been reading, or at least influenced in a small way by some of the things that I've said in the past. So let's go back to this. And this is what I'm going to finish up with. I want to talk a little bit about team science. Team science is a big one of the helixes in the triple helix of flow in the flow system, and I credit Professor John Turner with a tremendous amount of work in here, and also Brian Rivera Ponch, who's the third person who created the flow system with me, because he did a lot of work with the US Navy, and so teamwork is incredibly important when you're in these live fire in these sort of very dangerous situations. And of course we reflect on that within the Ukraine at the moment. So this is what a team is not. A team is not a group, collection, or a crowd of people shoved together. So all these people rolling out these agile transformations, as they call them in organizations, and they're shoving people together and into teams that just aren't teams and don't need to be teams. Teams are not a collection of people who use methodologies. That's another thing that they are not. Teams are not a collection of people who use tools. A team may use tools, but just a collection of people using tools doesn't make a team. And teams are not a collection of people who do independent tasks. That's a really important definition of what a team is not. So there's a difference between teamwork and task work. Task work is just using the knowledge, the skills, the abilities to do stuff, to do a task. Teamwork is a dynamic process that sort of develops over time, and it's composed of shared behaviors, attitudes, and cognitions. And it's a product, an emergent outcome, if you prefer, of all the team members, not the product of one or a few of the team members. It's a product of all the team members. So don't measure team performance. There's this obsession with KPIs around here. There's OKR KPI stuff that's been the flavor of the year, or the flavor of the last 2 or 3 years. And we start to measure how fast people are running in the hamster wheel. How many stories are complete in a sprint? You know, how many of this is done? How much is that done? How fast can they complete a user story or PBI? How many items are flowing across the Kanban board? And I've got a tip for you. If you're using lean metrics, cycle time, lead time to measure your Kanban, your work isn't complex. It's actually predictable work, because if you're in a complex area, those lean metrics won't actually work. So we want to measure team effectiveness, which includes performance, but it actually includes the interactions and the processes between teamwork and task work used to produce an outcome. These are the 9 C's of teamwork. Of course, this has been recorded, so people will be able to pause on this and look at them. I won't dig into them. We don't have the time today. But we've basically got influencing conditions, which are the things you have no choice over. You get stuck in a team. You don't necessarily get the choice of being in that team. And the context in which you're working is related to wherever the team is formed within the organization. So you're obviously working with a specific context within the context of the work you're doing, be it technical or otherwise, and also the products and service of that organization and the culture of that company, whatever's formed and emerged over the time the company's been or the organization has been in existence. And then on the left hand side, you've got the things, and some of these words like coordination, communication were mentioned in the mention. You've got the others on the screen as well. So let me just tell you, I built some slides because people were struggling with the difference between collaboration and cooperation. Collaboration is true teamwork. That implies shared ownership and accountability, and that you have a shared interest in the outcome. Where cooperation is just helping somebody nicely, willingly, but you actually don't have a shared interest in that outcome. And if actually something goes wrong, you don't have to share the blame, the accountability, the ownership, but when you're collaborating, you do. And what we actually want is more collaboration and less cooperation. And then we got this idea of dependency versus independency. So, and this is really, really important, because if something is dependent, like a manufacturing line, step 4 here is reliant on steps 3, 2, and 1. They are dependent upon them, but they don't collaborate with them. They just wait for the preceding processes to be completed. And this is probably where you would use a Kanban type technique, hence how Toyota work. But when you're looking at the game of soccer or any other team sport, the work is interdependent. It requires collaboration, and the tasks cannot be done independently. You cannot complete the work independent of others. In this dependent work, the work is both independent and dependent. But when you're playing a team sport, the work is interdependent. So we can mitigate dependencies through cooperation, but interdependencies are mitigated through collaboration. So if things are dependent, we cooperate, which is where you've got the 4-step process on the slide. But when things are interdependent, we mitigate through continuous collaboration. If it's dependencies only, we don't need a team. If the work is interdependent, you do need a team. So if it's dependent, you need coordination. If it's interdependent and requires a team, you need collaboration. The other thing about cross-functionality, everybody talks about multi-skilled, and cross-functionality comes from the Toyota concept of multi-skilled workers on multi-skilled teams. Here's a multi-skilled team. Just because you shove a bunch of people together with a bunch of skills doesn't make them a team. The only it doesn't define me, it's a characteristic of a team. You can have a collection of differently skilled people, but it's still not a team unless their work is interdependent. They need each other to complete the work. So a nurse and a doctor and a surgeon are probably interdependent, would work together as a team. But you're probably not going to bring a mechanic into a classroom, maybe with a teacher, unless the lesson's about being a mechanic, because the work is completely unrelated. So be careful with this idea of shoving people together and calling them multi-skilled. This was a diagram that Professor Turner put up together, and I just visualized a little differently. If you've got very simple tasks, very binary simple tasks, an individual can perform them. This is independent work and does not require a team. As you move more towards and this just in the diagram, the way diagram is laid out, more towards the right, we get more complicated tasks. Complicated tasks, if you're thinking of Cynefin, that's that top right sort of domain of complicated work. This is where you need expertise. The tasks are difficult and you need expertise, so you need cooperation. The tasks are dependent upon each other and require cooperation, but are still independent, again, in the manufacturing example here. But when we move really into complex work, we need a great deal of collaboration. The tasks are interdependent, in fact, highly interdependent, and a team is necessary. And the test is this: if the work is interdependent, then you need a team. And if the work is not interdependent, you don't need each other to complete the task. You may be dependent on somebody else, or you can work on the task independently. You don't actually need a team. And I'm really finding a lot of problems in companies where people are rolling out the concepts of large teams or tribes or collections of teams, different words for it, where they're being forced into teams when they're not actually a team. And it's actually counterproductive. and it's affecting people's behavior and people's happiness at work by being forced into these artificial teams. Here's some examples of teams. Dynamic teams, this comes from the crew concept. This is how US naval aircraft carriers work. You've got diverse people who are able to focus without any preparation and can create these immediate teams, these spontaneous teams. This relies on the teams, the people having these really high level of team working skills. Some of the things we mentioned earlier, communication, collaboration, conflict resolution, various other things on the 9C slide. So this is where, if you want to use this type of dynamic team that can form every day or within a constraint of a set of tasks that need to be performed, you need people that are highly skilled at actually working together. And that's called the crew concept. An example in aviation is the pilots at the front of the plane. These pilots don't work together every day. They often don't even work together on more than one flight. But when they get on the flight together, they are highly interdependent and they're an exceptionally high performing team. And this is the type of stuff we learned from Ponch from his naval work when we created the flow system. So you need to focus on training people in team working skills to enable them to be high performing in the context you're using them. This is a technique from the lean world. It's called a temporary flow cell or a workflow cycle. These are very diverse people who work in very independent areas, but they become dependent on each other. So accounting, vendor management, legal, contracts, whatever. So this is a technique, and I use this to great efficiency at Toyota Connected and other places where, and this is just one example, that these people are brought together for a period of focused working together. It's a temporary multi-skilled team or cross-functional team. They come together on a defined cadence for a period of time. We turn off the phones, turn off their email, and they can work together. And we got to the point where we could do MSAs in 5 days, master services agreements in 5 days. I have clients who take more than a year to do an MSA. These are techniques to solve those problems. Temporary teams, sometimes called tiger teams, SWAT teams. The danger with this, though, is you could be robbing Peter to pay Paul, because as you form these tiger teams to go on special missions to resolve certain things, you're pulling the resources from the rest of your organization. So you're not actually solving your organizational design problems by having lots of these tiger teams or these SWAT teams or special projects teams. You need to use these very sparingly in crisis situations, and you need to resolve the organizational constraints that force you to use these types of teams. Last slide for you is innovation and creativity occurs through teamwork. This emergent learning, this emergent discovery occurs through teamwork and not in a framework. And I think that's all I put together for this conversation. I hope it was useful, valuable, interesting, amusing, shocking. I can't wait to see what Andre says to me in the PST Slack community after this. But
actually, and we talk about that. We spoke about that Scrum doesn't solve everything.
No,
it solves it. It's hard even to say how much stuff Scrum solves. And a lot of people tend to forget what Scrum is all about and what Scrum aims to bring to the organization. And Scrum aims to bring done increment every sprint. And in order to do that, you have to change a bunch of stuff in your organization. And as Ken said, Scrum acts like a mother-in-law who doesn't help you clean up, but will gladly point out all of your mistakes.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I think, well, I used to paraphrase it, you know, even though she loves you very much, if you invite her to stay, she'll point out all your faults. Now, we always paraphrase things badly that Ken has said, but that's, I mean, Scrum is a fantastic way of working. I mean, I'm still a huge believer in it. It's part of my work in the flow system. I don't criticize it from that point of view. What I criticize is people's expectation. You can just shove Scrum into an organization and suddenly magically everything solves itself, and that's just not true. But it's a great forcing function. Actually, one of my other slides I'll use when I'm in the Netherlands will tell you that using a framework actually forces the organization to face some of these challenges. but then they tend not to do anything about those challenges, and that then becomes the problem. And they blame Scrum. Oh, this Agile stuff doesn't work, this Scrum thing's no use, blah, 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 blah. And that actually isn't the problem. And so when I said, does Scrum and Agile solve everything? Of course it doesn't. And there's some nuances there in the language. But anyway, I hope that people who watch this after the recording as well will find it interesting and useful. And I was going to say a couple of last words, but look, I want people to support what you're doing with the Ukraine. I want this to become genuinely desperately important. I want them to donate to the things that they believe, whether it's you or whether it's somebody else that's supporting Ukraine. I want them to support in any way they possibly can. Just awareness, just making a comment, wear a yellow and blue ribbon, you know, bear witness to the things that are happening, or help more if you can do in any way you can, because, you know, we've had a little bit of fun tonight, but there are people, you know, sitting in the Ukraine tonight, Artem, who are sitting there. And let me tell you, I'm going to tell you a story. I can't tell the client's name, but I was with a client the last couple of weeks, and we were talking about a delivery of some work, a sprint. And I was asking about some of the challenges they'd had. And actually one of the developers was in a bomb shelter releasing software to production in the Ukraine. And that sort of, I was like, that was very sobering. When somebody said that to me, I was like, you know, there's nothing else I can say. There is, I mean, I'm done. I mean, there's really, what do you say to that? You know, and why would he even be doing that? Why would he not be trying to do something for himself, his family, the people around him, his friends, his colleagues? He was in a bomb shelter helping push a release to production. And that
I will
to me
share a
was
link
Autumn.
to post in LinkedIn with this same story. It's quite a everyday routine, so to say, in Ukraine now, unfortunately.
I mean, I live a very fortunate life, and I'm very lucky to live in a country that I think is very safe and is very privileged and has a lot of benefits. And I can't even imagine what all these folks are going through, what your countrymen, your colleagues, your families, your friends, relatives, compatriots are going through. And then somebody tells me there's somebody in bomb shelter pushing code to production.
Nigel, let me tell you this. I was very fortunate to be born in Ukraine. I'm super proud about being born with Ukraine. The only thing we're unlucky about as Ukrainian is that we got shit a neighbor, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. This is
No, and I'm, you know, and let me tell you something, and you know, whether it's, so some of I have some friends who are Russian, and I work with Russians. We know some Russian PSTs, and you know, when I was in Hungary recently, I had dinner with one of the really clever guys who's Russian, and they don't support what's happening. I mean, it's 100% clear they don't support it. And we have to remember that not everybody supports the idiot in the Kremlin that's doing these things. And I definitely don't. And we have to, I fear for some of the people I know, and I know of one organization that's rapidly trying to get their developers out of Russia because, you know, they want them in a safer place. They also want their organizations to survive who use Russian developers, but they're not a Russian company, but they've given jobs to Russian citizens. So I try and remember that, but my first thoughts, of course, are with Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, and with the people who are suffering through this. So my heart goes out to them, and I hope that anything we do is just a little bit useful.
Thanks a lot. Maybe you have some questions. We still have 11 minutes. Sure. Maybe it's time for questions.
Nigel, Justin here. I'm called Caroline on screen. That's my partner. I follow your work quite closely. But I saw a little video of you, David Staden. You're done at UDA. UDA. You're discussing UDA, and it's really complex and it's mind blowing. And you're saying I'm a mere mortal when you're listening to people like David Snowden. But it's just the same when I listen to you, Nigel. When I've watched your slides, I'm thinking, I do some of this, but I can't do it as well as what Nigel's just done it. So yeah, I think you need to reevaluate your level of goodness, whatever.
Yeah, no, so I appreciate that and thank you, because the reason we're writing the playbook at the moment is we're trying to, I said to John, we needed to bring a book that helped people to learn these things very easily, very practically, but also then to provide them with a guide as a practitioner that they can go to as a reference whenever they need to reuse some of these techniques. Now, and that includes things like taking Dave's work with Cynefin and complexity, the ideas around the OODA loop, and how can you practice? I mean, what does this actually, how is this usable in a normal company, in a normal context? And how can I actually use that as a practitioner? How can I understand it first? But then how can I apply it as a practitioner? And actually, how can I use it with a customer or an organization where maybe I work as an employee or I work as a consultant or something? How can I use it in a way that allows us to be understood and that they understand it and they see the value and the utility in it? So I take all that on board. And whilst we're pushing the boundaries of trying to understand things at that sort of, trust me, when I have conversations with Dave Snowden, I sit there looking, you may say you listen to me and go, I listen to Dave. I have Zoom calls with him, and I'm like, I have no idea what he's saying. I mean, I'm literally Googling words he's using, and he's sat in my house on my sofa, enjoying an adult beverage, having a conversation, and I've sat there Googling words while he's next to me. I'm my head. I'm not making this up, I promise you. So I am aware of that. I push the boundaries because I want to bring this to a different level, but the playbook will be, I hope, a book which we're trying to emulate the online training where people can use it as a study guide. There'll be QR codes to download assets and things to make things easier, worksheets and things to learn from. But it's written in a language, a practitioner's language. And it's the type of book. Many years ago, I picked up one of Jeff Leica's books after the Toyota Way, bought the Toyota Way field guide out, and I was a young guy at Toyota at the time, and I picked up this book, and I've still own this book, and it's full of little, post-it notes and tabs and everything. Look, Anshu's got one of my books, one of my guides, and so and basically I used his book extensively in my early Toyota career, and I've actually modeled the playbook on that field guide that Jeff wrote, the same concept, because I wanted a book that everybody could pick up and actually find it easy to use. And there's some other things that Dave's releasing, these little sort of shapes, these hexagons, which are all these different practices, and he's releasing a new tool, which is really simple to use, where you can map different practices in different contexts and try and solve some of the challenges you've got. So I'm trying, I promise I'm trying.
Another quick question, if no one else has got any. So I really like Kanban, and I heard you just say it's a complicated, and I've heard David Snowden say it's a complicated system, if you call it a system. Can you just clarify why we say Scrum is complex and Kanban is complicated, so I understand what you're
So Kanban was developed by Toyota as a system to manage inventory and work. Yeah, so it's a pull system. You get the basic concepts. Yeah, but it's linear, it's ordered, it's predictable, it's based upon standardized, repeatable process, standardized work, and leveling the workflow. So we don't have variability. We try and reduce the variability. And in simple software development terms, if you've got more developers than you have testers, if you're in that linear fashion, yeah, which is what a lot of Kanban folks use, the very linear approach, then you're going to have a constraint. So what you do is you reduce your development resources, increase your testing resources, and you get leveled workflow. So you've got a continuous flow. This is predictable, linear, and ordered. Hence, it's in the ordered domains, which is the clear and complicated domains. That's the ordered domains. Now, Scrum is designed in a way, and it does have an empirical process behind it. It's designed in a way where you can do experiments where the outcome is not predictable. So when the work is unpredictable, this is what's called empirical work, or the modern scientific method. You come up with an idea, a hypothesis, based upon observation. This is where some of my work blows people's minds, because there's 3 types of hypothesis. But in empirical work, you form a hypothesis, and from that you do an experiment, and from that you get some outcome that wasn't predictable. You may have had an idea, but you couldn't predict it. That's when we're moving more towards the complex world, where things are very entangled in many ways we cannot predict. It's unpredictable. It's not linear causality, where in the ordered world, it's very linear. If I poke you in the eye, you get pain. That's linear causality. Yeah. But when we talk of things like the pandemic, conflict, as we're talking about in this session, and other things, these are things that are very complex, very entangled, and we cannot predict the outcomes. So Scrum fits a little in sort of this zone between the ordered world and the complex world, which is what's known as this liminal world. And actually, as you drop into chaos, into the chaotic world, Scrum fits down there as well, because if you're in chaos, you just act, you do something, and you see what happens. Well, Scrum's very good at doing that, because you can just say, okay, we need to do an experiment. We're panicking, quickly do something, try something, see what happens, learn from it. And when we learn from it, we do the next thing. And we gradually can make more and more safe to fail experiments. Beginning with just acting, we have no idea what the outcome will be. But as we move through the complex space, the complex domain, we can then do some safe to fail experiments, experiments which we know won't cause us injury or harm or make the situation worse. And then from that point of view, we can work away. So this is where, when we talk about Scrum works for complex problems, my argument with a lot of Scrum is it's actually used for complicated problems, not complex work. And that's okay. It's not a bad thing. I just get sick of hearing people describe everything as empirical, because it's not.
I saw your article on LinkedIn, and I thought it was fantastic about hypothesis and doing experiments. I thought that was fantastic.
Trust me, it took when you and I write these things, you can guarantee there's a lot of very clever people who've helped me understand it. I don't just invent this stuff. I learn extensively from other people, and I promise you I learn all the time. You know, my favorite phrase is from the Karate Kid, when people ask me, you know, about Lean Six Sigma, what belt have I got, and you know, I quote Mr. Miyagi, you know, JC Penney 398, you like. You know, so I mean, that's the I can see, if anybody really wants now, I have a white belt. I'm just learning. I'm a beginner, and you're constantly learning. I mean, like you listen to me, I listen to many other people, and I guarantee that people listen to you. All of us are training, learning. We're all learning, but we're at the same time we're mentoring and guiding other people at the same time. You know, this whole thing that's going on. So I hope that helps. But I'm really pleased that some of what I do is useful to at least somebody. So that's good. Andre.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I got one. First of all, thank you, Nigel, for your speech and for the presentation. From your point of view and your experience, what are the most useful metrics for the Scrum teams that they need to collect and analyze to understand if they're going to the right way and they're doing the right things?
What are the right? Sorry, I missed the first bit. What are the key things?
What are the most useful metrics for the Scrum team?
Metrics. Oh dear, now you've opened a whole. We could do a whole other 2-hour presentation on that. You do realize that, yeah?
Okay, top three.
So, well, I mean, look, I'm trying not to be so cliched about outcome-based measures and things of that nature, but you know, we do need to know that the value the organization is delivering, or that the Scrum team is delivering, is actually valuable. And the only person who can tell you whether it's valuable is the recipient of that value, because, and I've said this many times, value is only valuable if the value is valued. I'll let you figure that one out later on the recording. But the thing is this, that at the end of the day, if what you are delivering, doesn't matter if you've got a done increment, a done increment is great, but if nobody wants it, it's useless. So the first thing you're ever looking at is what you're producing valuable? Now, how you measure that will vary, and there's lots of debates about that. Yeah, but ask the people who are receiving the thing you're creating, is it actually valuable? Yeah, that's the first thing. I'd also be measuring the team. I mean, people criticize this a lot, but you know, Jeff Sutherland used to talk about team happiness a lot, but I would like to be looking at the health of the team. Are the team tired, stressed, burning out, exhausted? You know, are they miserable? You know, or are they in the zone? I talk about flow a lot in the work of the Hungarian American professor who passed away recently, by the way, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who is the guy who created the concept of psychological flow. And what we're always trying to do is find this zone where we keep the people in this sort of zone. If they're scared or fearful, they'll fall out of flow. And if they are bored or apathetic, or in this case, miserable or unhappy, they'll fall out of flow. So how do we measure that? Now, there's no easy way to give you a single metric to measure that, but how do we monitor the health of the team? And that's where I see Scrum Masters. You know, Scrum Masters are a coach. There's a big debate about the word Scrum Master at the moment going on in the community, but whether we agree or don't agree on that. But the thing is this, that they coach the team. I always taught my Scrum Masters, they were team coaches. They were there to support the team, help the team, grow the team, nurture the team, amongst all the other things it says in the Scrum Guide and so on. But so I've been wanting to measure the team's health and welfare as much as anything. And then, hey, you know, well, let's measure quality. Wouldn't that be a good thing? You know, defects down, yeah, something like that. Maybe some simple metric, but quality. And so if we've got great value, great quality, and really, really high performing teams, which means happy and in flow and safe, and that, those might be three things I might look to be able to measure. And we can debate in another call exactly how we'd design those measures. Sergi, is that helping?
Thanks, Nigel. Thanks.
Hey,
Andre.
so we're past the time box. So thanks a lot, Nigel, and thanks a lot, everybody, from Artem and I. Observe our actions on our website. You can subscribe to our social profiles as well. Yeah, and tomorrow we have another great speaker, Ralph Joham.
Oh, he's brilliant, by the way. He's really, really good. I like Ralph immensely. I mean, in fact, you've had some fantastic people. I like Ralph immensely. Yep.
So we invite especially people who are interested in product ownership, because Ralph is awesome in that. He is one of the co-authors of the book, Professional Scrum Product Owner. Yeah. So a ton of insight is going to be tomorrow. And we're going to have other great speakers. For now, we thank you, Nigel. It was awesome. It was awesome. Thanks. It was refreshing.
Special thanks for Mentimeter. Finally, my son is trying to fall asleep so I can speak. You hear this sound around? I call it silence. It's rarely appears around last months, but I'm used to it.
Stay safe. Keep everybody safe. And I think the phrase is Slava Ukraini. So good luck.
Героям слава.
Героям слава. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you so much. Remember to donate.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Subscribe to our channel.
Yep.
Thank you.
Share with friends.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.